Okay, we should be live.
Good morning and welcome. Welcome. However you are joining us today. We are Amana Bible Institute and we are your hosts, Dr. Latoya Leary and myself, Onika Stewart. I am here to co-facilitate this webinar where we'll begin talking a little bit about emotional intelligence. So tell a friend, tell your neighbor, tell whoever it is it's close to you right now that we are getting ready to dialogue and have them click on the video in Facebook, YouTube, wherever they can join us this morning. And as you do that, don't forget to click like and share so that we can go ahead and start showing up in the Facebook algorithm and the YouTube algorithms, etc. So welcome. Get your pen and your paper. We're just gonna chat together here in a semi-informal kind of way. Latoya, let me know when you're ready to to go live. To engage.
Well, if you could just chat a little bit more, just trying to share to all of our socials.
Chat a
We
little
might
bit
not be
more.
live on Facebook as I hope, but we are definitely live on YouTube.
Well, hello, YouTubers. Welcome. I don't know if you're going to be seeing this video after we've concluded the live session, but however and whenever you encounter us, we want to welcome you. We are Amana Bible Institute, and we are focused on bridging the gap between the academy and the public in general as it relates to biblical studies, theology, religious studies. We embrace many different subject matters in the area of Bible, all things Bible, from the prophets to the Hebrew scriptures, just wherever. We just I am babbling. You have me babbling today. Am I live on YouTube still?
Yes, you're still live on YouTube. For some reason, we don't have our Facebook feed, but I will go ahead and post the YouTube video on Facebook after.
Okay, can we cut out some of that babbling stuff? We can cut some of that.
We're live on YouTube.
You said you'll post it after? Okay.
I can edit it after, sure. I can do more work and edit after.
I'm not very good at this. Yeah, Latoya is usually the one who will bring us in and she'll do all the dialogue and stuff like that. So I have to get my feet a little bit more wet. But I'll get the hang of this, guys. But we're glad you joined us anyway. So I'm gonna let Latoya go ahead and work her magic, and then I'll come right back in.
I promise there's no magic. Nonetheless, as Professor Onika mentioned, we are Amana Bible Institute, and we are here to help you embrace lifelong learning with the Bible and in everyday, life, essentially. A lot of what we do here is helping you to deepen your biblical study, but also help you to exist in the world more meaningfully. And that brings us to our topic today. This is the #Presence Matters webinar. It's one of the many, and this particular webinar is all about the Bible and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a buzzword in so many ways in European countries and a few other places. It is something that is discussed here in the United States, but it's probably not as prevalent as it is in other countries. And so I want us to actually think about what emotional intelligence is, because I do think that it is very important, and it is something that is very prevalent in psychological circles everywhere. And I think the Bible does, in so many ways, responds to or thinks through, helps people think through what it might mean to be emotionally intelligent. So yeah, Professor Onika, can you give us an idea of how you see emotional intelligence?
Ooh, how I see it. So how about if I can tell you how I see it as well, but can we just talk a little bit about the field itself? and like where you know, just kind of like how that kind of came to be to some extent, I think, because we could all have our own individual thoughts about what something is, but from the persons who kind of helped to develop the field, I think they have the best definition. So what they have coined as emotional intelligence, right? If
Mhm.
that's okay, is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's cool. This
Awesome.
is just a webinar, so just talking will just kind of flow.
Okay. So so emotional intelligence is the definition that I've seen in what we call psychological circles or in scholarly material that psychologists have kind of produced is that emotional intelligence is this idea of being able to be aware of one's emotions, your own personal emotions, as well as the emotions of others, right? And being able to handle what we call interpersonal relations. So being able to recognize, be aware of how each person is feeling, yourself and the other person, and being able to use those cues to relate to each other, to relate to the other person, right? How we relate through empathy, whether it is that means that we put ourselves in that person's shoes, or we determine by logic or reason how we're gonna respond, whether it be to a facial expression, a gesture, all of those things, all of those aspects of our personality come into play when we talk about emotional intelligence. So for a real definition, so to speak, that according to Goleman, the emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. That's a lot of words right there. So Goleman is an American psychologist who actually helped to develop this particular field. The field is very young; it's about 30 years old. Emerged in right around 1990 or so. And his in his framework, he talks about various components that come together to form what we call emotional intelligence. And what's very interesting about emotional intelligence is that in today's society, we're using cues and clues and research from this particular field to determine a person's attitude from an academic perspective, to also determine or to to pinpoint or highlight or even predict if a person has various tendencies, like if a person has a tendency to be a bully, or a person has a tendency to become a serial killer. They're using emotional intelligence to determine a lot of these things. So it's when we started talking about this, I thought this was like a amazing field to kind of begin to explore, because so much of it kind of helps us to understand our own person, right? How we were created, and then how we function in the world too. So I thought it was very interesting. So hopefully some of this conversation will help us to kind of to feel the same way. Toya?
Yeah,
Oh,
no.
I need to answer your question though. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of how I understand emotional intelligence, is that it's just that my ability to locate where I am emotionally on my emotional spectrum, right? And how I am able to handle where I am or what I'm feeling emotionally, right, in the moments, in a particular moment, and how I'm able to handle my emotions also in relation to the personal persons with whom I'm in conversation with, or with whom I'm having some kind of relationship with, whether it be a conversation or whatever it is at that time. But not just that, but it's also being able to I'm going to use a Christianese word, discern the other person's emotional state, perspective, standpoint, whatever that looks like in that moment as well, so that we can have, if I'm interested in having good relationship, so that we can have good rapport. But if I'm not interested in good relationship, so that I can aggravate that individual, right? Because you can use your emotional intelligence to in negative ways as well as positive ways, and hopefully we'll we'll get to kind of talk or explore some of that as we maybe talk through some scriptures and stuff as they come up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does. Though, I'm always thinking about the larger picture with things. I would think that, I would think that I would hope that we would utilize all of our understanding of our own selves and of the emotional states of those around us to move people forward and to not work to manipulate people. But you're absolutely right. People definitely utilize their emotional awareness in ways that allow them to control and manipulate others. One of the things that or one of the larger fields that come to mind is, the research concerning new religious movements and how a lot of leaders of these new religious movements, the old word we used to use to describe these movements, cult, right? It's often the case that these leaders have a sensitivity to the emotional state of those around them. And while they themselves might be in these positions where they are fragile emotionally as well, they understand enough about the others, and they're able to, in one way or another, utilize their awareness to control and manipulate others despite their own emotional frailties, essentially. So that came to mind. Maybe it's because I am doing a lot of research on Jonestown. I don't know, but yeah. I totally agree. And I think the Bible speaks to this very strongly. In our past discussions of this, I've kind of thought about this in multiple angles. First off, I love that the research really brings about this idea that emotional intelligence it's not just determined by a person's ability to know him or herself well, but it is determined by a person's ability to exist well in community or in relationships with others. And I think that's probably where emotional intelligence shows up the strongest in the Bible, in these stories or in these laws that govern how people interact with one another. And one of the ones that came to mind while you were talking, it's in Deuteronomy. It's all over the Old Testament. But there's one reference in Deuteronomy 15:15, this need to remember when you were slaves in Egypt. Remember when you were a slave. This is why you don't treat your slaves badly, is the idea. And then here in Deuteronomy chapter 24, around verses 17 and 18, it says, "You shall not deprive a resident alien or an orphan of justice. You shall not take a widow's garment in pledge. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this." So the book we want to, or the testament we want to often throw out throw out the door, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, it's ultimately filled with legislation that's reminding the people of how God saved them from slavery and how they once were, their own social position, and how they cannot and should not, allow other people to, be in those positions at their own hands, which is really interesting, that it's actually forcing people to think through how they treat others and how they live with others. It has everything to do with emotional intelligence when you think about it.
So one of the things that struck me, kind of reading some of the material about in terms of the definition of emotional intelligence, is that they were very specific to say that it is only emotional intelligence when you're using this ability or these abilities in positive ways. Which is what you're saying in terms of what the Bible is also giving us guidance on, right? They're saying that it's using the ability to manage your emotions in positive ways, right? So I wonder what the opposite of emotional intelligence would be in when you think about it from that vantage point. But that we could probably we could probably flesh that out in a little bit. But it says positive ways to relieve stress. So it's to relieve the burden, right? Kind of like what you're talking about. It's not to place burdens on people, but it is to relieve burden. So there's this idea of human empathy, all that kind of stuff that kind of ties into, and like you said, this idea of community for the good of the whole, the good of the group, right? Not just for the person, the individual person. So I thought that was really interesting. And you don't see science centered on or being, in my opinion, being specific about it has to be done in a positive way. Science will just give you the facts and you choose to use it however you want. But this particular definition stresses the importance of you are emotionally intelligent. You're defined as emotionally intelligent when you harness these skill sets and for positive use. And I think that alone lines it up with the word, with the Bible.
Yeah, I think psychology is always an interesting field in that it is science in one way or another and not science at all. Because so much of it is subjective, and science is subjective too, but we often think we're often taught to think of science as all based upon experiments and things that are factual, but in reality there are just very few things that are really factual and objective, and science is certainly not one of them. Though psychology becomes the science of the mind, and it is in so many ways the area where people get to kind of branch out into things like religion, right? And because a lot of it is so heavily bent upon experience, and I think that's where you get the emotional intelligence part there. It's very important research, but I think I agree, the emphasis on utilizing this in a positive to drive the world forward, to lead to a better end is something, like I said, it's the part of it that kind of gets closest to religion and what people hope religion would do for people, right?
Yeah. So what's also interesting is that emotional intelligence, you can grow or develop along those lines, right? You can start off in one place, but as you continue to recognize who you are, where you are, your state of mind, and state of mind of other people, and you continue to use those skills, you grow. It's the same thing, or it's similar to how we experience life as what we call believers, right? Or people of faith, right? People who observe specific religious traditions. The expectation is that as you continue to live this out, as you continue to discover or uncover this religious practice, that you are evolving, right? And becoming bigger or better, whatever that looks like. It's the same, it's a similar concept that emotional intelligence kind of affords us, right? This ability to transform as we learn more, as we dig deeper, and that's the whole faith practice, right? This whole idea of digging deeper. So there's so many parallels already, I think, with this discipline, which I think is probably why it's intriguing to us. So yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that come to mind in what you're saying is, psychologically, it's been an expectation for decades, if not longer, that parents will teach their children emotional management, right? Which in one way or another has everything to do with emotional intelligence, that it is the job and role of parents to train their children to regulate, to identify and regulate their emotions. This is totally done in the Bible. So a lot of people do not think about the book of Proverbs as they ought to. The book of Proverbs, at least the very first 9 chapters of it, you can think of it as wisdom from parent to child, a son, a young man, coming into maturity. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. This is the type of wife or the type of woman you need to marry, the type of woman you need to run away from. And in addition to that, this is how you treat This is how you don't treat people, right? You don't be greedy. You don't manipulate people. You know, all of these rules embedded in what they're calling traditional wisdom or practical wisdom, all coming out of the mouth of a father or a mother and father as instruction to his or her son.
I think that's an excellent parallel. And so emotional intelligence is like it's a bucket, right? And inside this bucket, there are many other things in this bucket, for want of a better word. But so as you're talking, I'm thinking about the components that Goleman says that he put forward as being the seedbed for understanding what emotional intelligence is all about. And this Proverbs captures all of this stuff. So there are 5 different ones. He talks about self-awareness, right? Doesn't Proverbs help us to become self-aware, to recognize who we are, where we are, understand our place in the world, our purpose in the world, right? I'm sure you could probably think of some scriptures or some verses already that probably tell us about that. How about self-regulation? Doesn't Proverbs talk about how to not to be greedy, not to have in excess and all that kind of good stuff? But Proverbs cautions us along those lines. What about motivation? Motivation is another component of emotional intelligence. Proverbs nailed it. So I'm wondering if Goleman had in view any of this in terms of any of this that we find in the book of Proverbs, right? What about empathy and social skills? Proverbs, the writer is telling the child how to be successful at life. And guess what they call emotional intelligence? The key to success at life.
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about whether these researchers have Bible in mind. I couldn't help but to think about the reality of what Proverbs is and everything that you said, though. And I think that these are very important conversations because we are a Bible Institute and we have to be honest about what's in the text and how the text has been used. And one thing about the book of Proverbs and one thing about practical or traditional wisdom and books that have traditional wisdom in itself, right? Traditional wisdom is that wisdom that suggests that if you input something, you're going to output, right? You're going to reap what you sow. And in this way, Proverbs is teaching the motivation. That's what got me there. The motivation is if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to get X, Y, and Z. And the idea is that if you cheat the poor man, if you are greedy, if you are immoral, you're going to reap death and deprivation and loss and poverty, right? You know, the idea is to get good, you must be good. That's what Proverbs is kind of teaching. Traditional wisdom, this is the same wisdom that shows up or comes out of the mouths of Job's friends. They almost essentially tell him, either you deserve this because you did something wrong, or you will see that God will vindicate you because you ain't do jack wrong. It's either this is your test of righteousness. This is going to let us know whether you're righteous or not. And Job in itself, his response in the words of God in the end, kind of combat this type of traditional wisdom. So there is some form of tension in the biblical text when it comes to all of that and all of this in itself. But even in the tension that's there, you know, on the other side, for example, of traditional wisdom, you know, this more speculative, this more uncapturable idea of wisdom in itself, this idea that things don't always work the way that you hope that they would work in the world, that this idea that human beings have limited control and that we can't really capture what wisdom really is. Even in that, you find emotional intelligence. So it's really, really interesting how all of this shows up in the text, the very reality of the text, that people can certainly say, ha, I found a negative and potential harmful aspect of the Bible. You know, you go over to texts that kind of combat that, and you find something really empowering there too, outside of the fact that it's being contentious with texts that could be utilized harmfully.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, those emotional or those motivational clauses in the Bible are always really funny to me, because they get at what a lot of people want to get at when they're suggesting that the Bible is a negative book. But even the motivation clauses do something really great. One of an example that I can think of right now is in Deuteronomy 5, when we talk about the 10 Commandments or the Decalogue. In the 10 Commandments is originally in Exodus 20, it seems. And then in Deuteronomy 5, we get a reiteration of the 10 Commandments, and they're full of motivation clauses. And they kind of help people understand why they need to do things, or help people to understand what they're going to get out of doing them. And one example here, let's see. And some of these motivation clauses aren't really motivational, you know, in the end, nonetheless. But here's one that might not feel so motivational. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. It's always that for the rationale that brings out the motivational clause. And here's a positive one. It's verse 16. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, so that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord God is giving you, right? All of these, you know, motivation clauses that are tied to rules on how to treat the people around you and how to honor God in that treatment as well. And it can certainly be argued that I guarantee you that the 10 Commandments in one way or another can be found in all of these rules, or all of these larger concepts that help people to get to what it means to be emotionally intelligent, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Because 10 Commandments is all about it's all about how to treat people, right?
Right.
And worship to God is about treating people well.
Mm-hmm. I think so yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I'm thinking about when we talk about motivation, I think about even our relationship with deity, right? That there are certain things that we, even our motivations there with deity, right? Our motivations with deity transactional in nature, in that are we only putting in prayer time, this time, XYZ, exercising the observance of these particular commandments, etc., just so that we could reap from the hand of a benevolent God? Or is our motivation for doing these things so that we can deepen relationship, right? So why do we do what we do altogether? That in itself, the reason why we do what we do it clues one in to how emotionally intelligent you are as a person, right? Yeah. Okay, let's bring it home. For example, some people they might have job offers, right? And for them, their motivation might be the money. Others, the motivation might be peace of mind, right? Depending on what is being offered to them. I think the reason why you make a choice when it comes to, let's say, a job offer, it could be a number of different things, of course, but if it's down to choosing less money so you can have peace of mind, I think that's an indicator of a person being emotionally intelligent, right? Yeah. Or having some grasp on their emotional intelligence. So just this idea behind why we do what we do. It helps to frame it helps to frame purpose, right? To some extent. So what about I'll let you jump in. I'm the thought is escaping me right now, but I think that can help a lot of us. Emotional intelligence, and there are a lot of different tests that we can do and actually to kind of determine where we are on the spectrum. But I think it can help many of us kind of pinpoint where we are, and maybe some of the things that we might need to change or learn or grow in order to fulfill purpose or to walk in purpose. I think we looking into some of those exercises that we can do from an emotional intelligence standpoint can really help to align us with who we say we are, who God says we are, and who God says we ought to be in the world. I don't know why I went there, but I just thought about purpose. Um, we see some people every day walking in what we call purpose. Is that a sign or an indicator that these individuals are at a place where we can designate or say that they are emotionally intelligent, right? Or how do you just so many questions come up. How do you develop in order to be able to be emotionally intelligent so that you can walk out purpose in some of those ways that we see other people doing it? Things like that are coming to mind.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of what you said that is interesting to me. One of those things is the importance of why, the importance of intention, um, and what is powering your intention as being key to emotional intelligence. But I think that's also your segue into purpose, right? There are lots of people who exist in the world who will take that higher paying job because it's a job, it pays the bills, it helps them to exist well in the world. It gives them what the world teaches them that they need. But they might not necessarily think much of their purpose outside, excuse me, sneeze. So they might not think much about their purpose outside of what it might mean to exist well in a world based off of finances. Like I have family members who are extremely competitive in their field, and their competitiveness is rewarded by high pay. They can say, I made X amount of dollars a year. I worked like crazy, but you got everything you needed, didn't you? Right? And that becomes purpose for them. I think in one way or another, what the Bible teaches us is that our purpose has to go beyond caring for ourselves. It has to go beyond the cares of the world. And it has to have within it some bit of idea of how we can make the world better, make others better, share Christ with others. And that doesn't have to be through you going out and being some kind of missionary or going into ministry or anything of that nature. But yeah, I think that is really interesting. But I really do think it's important that we emphasize that emotional intelligence it's on a spectrum. So, so that people understand that if they fail in one area, that they're actually, it's not making a statement that they're not emotionally intelligent. Right. Or and the opposite is true too. Just because you believe yourself or you see others to be walking in purpose doesn't mean that they're emotionally intelligent, in all of the ways you perceive them to be as well.
I think emotional intelligence causes us to ask the question, well, what is it that causes or that this person or X person is doing to walk in purpose or to live in this particular way that I can glean, right? That's this whole idea of being self-aware, recognizing that, okay, I might be lacking something. I might be deficient in an area. That's self-awareness, right? So yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, we are always going to be deficient in areas. We cannot provide ourselves everything. If we could, there would be no need for community. There will be no need for effective fellowship, and there will be no need for, um, I don't know, spirit, divine intervention, all of these things. We are always going to find ourselves deficient. And sometimes it's going to be in our emotional awareness. I think a good example of this is Job. We always think of Job as this beautiful, wise, wealthy man who was just oh so righteous, but we forget about a few of the things. The test that Job is undergoing is one all about disinterested righteousness. Is Job righteous because being righteous and doing righteousness gets you good stuff? So it's good for him. It makes him wealthy. It makes him well known. He has a good reputation, a good name. It works for him. Or is he righteous because this is genuine to his intention? He really desires to be righteous, even if it didn't do what was good for him. So what does Hasatan in the book do? Strip Job of all of the things that would have signified his wealth and would have increased his reputation, given him a name in the land. His children, his houses, his wealth, his servants are like the only people living and running away, kind of thing. And his health, right? The entire book, in one way or another, is a question about disinterested righteousness. And by the end of the book, if you read the whole thing, you will see a Job who's angry, who pretty much gives God some of that anger, indicts God, it brings God into a court of law and says, look what you did to me. We don't roll like that. What did I do? And you find a Job who's emotional. He's stressed, he's overwhelmed. And Job, while he is elevated by God, and he kind of wins in one way or another, passes the test, you might think. He's also critiqued by God in the end. He's reminded that he knows nothing, that he is just one human being who, literally tunnel vision. He had tunnel vision when he was going through all of these things. He only thought about how he existed in the world and only thought about God as a God who exists to satisfy Job's own desires and needs. Job forgot that God is sovereign over the world and that there were things that God has to consider when governing the world that goes beyond the needs of one individual person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
It is.
Job went through a lot, and I think we get to eavesdrop on his psyche in ways that if you guys don't want to eavesdrop on my psyche, because many times I'm like Job myself, right? I go through all of those emotions. I mean, I just had a bout of that maybe a couple of weeks ago, but there's something that there's a key element that helps us to define or to determine, to realize that we're on the right track. And it's this idea of problem solving. So emotional intelligence brings with it or carries with it this need, this desire to solve life's problems, right? To de-escalate conflict and things like that. So this wrestling that we hear with between God and Job and Job's friends, that's the space where this transformation is taking place. This emotional development is taking place, because I'm sure if we could have gotten an epilogue of Job from Job's life, his emotional state, his perspective on life would have changed, right? We probably would have had a completely different Job. And I'm saying all that to say, because it brings to mind one person from the New Testament, one of the New Testament writers, that is Paul, right? Well, I mean, the New Testament, we have the majority of what we have, we call it Paul's. But anyways, Paul, so there must be something from Paul, but I'm thinking about Paul's wrestling with Paul's self. When Paul, talks about the dilemma between what he wants to do and what he knows he shouldn't be doing. And I think that is when we find ourselves in that space. I think here is the Bible talking about this phenomenon called emotional intelligence, managing internal conflict, managing the relationship between deity and humanity, managing this living what we call a righteous life, or a life of devotion, versus living a life just without care and carefree, or carelessly, I should say. In that space where that happens, that gray area, that area of turmoil where that's happening, I believe that is where our emotional intelligence is being formed and transformed. And that's how we can relate it to the text, because I know one of the things that people, our students, our listeners, viewers like to hear when they come to these webinars is, how do we marry or align some of these modern thoughts, ideas, perspectives with what we find in the text. And I think those are two ways for those of you who are New Testament lovers. Think about Paul. There's a different Paul from the time he started his journey towards the end of that in itself is we see a growth in Paul, right? We see some change in him. Well, some of us might not see much growth, but anyways, we see change, we see difference, right? The Paul who wrote Thessalonians is a different Paul when we come to some of the later writings and things like that. And it's the same thing when you start the book of Job. There's a different, it ends differently from where it started. And that shows development. That shows somewhere along the line, there's a shift. There's an emotional shift, right? There's a psychological shift. And I think all of those things lend themselves to forming or creating or presenting a profile that we now call emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Dare I say we see this of God too in the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
And that's really rough to acknowledge, because we are taught that God does not change, right? Mm-hmm. But what is changing in the text is how people are seeing their deity. That is changing. And God does change in the Bible. Every chapter, every book of the Bible thinks of their deity differently. God is something else to them. One good example of this would be how God, and this isn't a bad example, or it's an example that could bring about negative thoughts of the Bible, actually. In some ways, there are ideas in the Hebrew Bible that God is against the nations, that God is against foreigners. But there are just as many texts in the Bible. I just read one to you in Deuteronomy that suggests that you need to treat your foreigners well, that God is not against them. Let them into your gates, right? Let them in. You get tons of prophetic literature, seeing not only Israel coming out on top and victory and restoration for Israel, but you see enlightenment of the nations in Isaiah 60, Isaiah 61, in Jeremiah, and in so many of these other prophetic books. But then you get to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's like, we go build this new temple, and guess what? No strangers allowed. Because he, in so many ways, the text is suggesting that it was mingling with outsiders that caused this, right? There's a rationale to it, but all of these people, these writers, are seeing God differently. So you also have to acknowledge that God is changing in the book, and because God is changing in the book, you can kind of see this evolution, or should I say devolution, depending on what you're reading and in what order you're reading, of people's perceptions of God, and that ends up having a lot to do with emotional intelligence. Hosea, the puppy loved God in the beginning of the book, and then the no nonsense father in the middle of the book. Completely different portrayals of the same deity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there are other stories, right? There's Abraham, who his entire story you can see is an evolution. Joseph, right? His entire story is an evolution. Jacob, whose story ends up, giving him a whole new name, his new name symbolizing his own growth and maturity. And then some people who were not viewed as emotionally intelligent, like Ahab and the whole Jezebel thing, stealing the vineyard, killing Naboth. Like there's some anecdotes against what happens when you don't learn how to regulate your emotions and deal with your desires well.
Mm-hmm. And I think I love that. I think I love what I see here, because what it brings to mind when I think about the text you're talking about and the subject matter, emotional intelligence, is this idea of fluidity, or room for whatever growth, expansion, or the reverse. And this is what, and so the experts say, this is what kind of sets EQ, or emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, apart from the IQ kind of testing or standard, in that when we use IQ alone to determine where a person is, right, from an aptitude standpoint, it's black and white, right? It's either they're in or they're out. But from where we're sitting, emotional intelligence allows breadth and depth, and you can fall anywhere along that spectrum, so to speak, and still be in. It's not creating so much to say outsiders. It's we all land somewhere on the spectrum. And I think that's some of what I hear or see. And I'm hearing as you're talking about the text, this ability to change, to transform. I keep using that word. There's fluidity there. So there's room for mistakes. There's room for correcting those mistakes, and so on and so forth. And I think that gives me hope. That gives me hope, because I think about so many people who might not land, or might land on the negative end of an IQ test, so to speak, right? And how that might impact how they maneuver, how they function, how they present themselves in the world, as opposed to another test that kind of explores deeper depths, myriads of ways in which people can show up in the world, and everyone find a place, and how that might have a more positive impact. I'm just thinking about all of that as it relates to our conversation.
Yeah, and this has me thinking about lament psalms, because they are so freaking emotional. They all come from an emotional place. But by the end of it, you find such a growth in emotions, right? A change, a transformation in emotions. What starts off so with so great sadness and need and desperation ends often in praise and in confidence and in trust, and I think that's just points to the power of prayer, actually. because lament psalms are it's essentially prayer, you know, and it has embedded in it this idea that when you're going through things or in however you might feel, all you have to do is essentially share your complaint or you bring your lament to God. And by the end of it, even if you don't get immediate resolution to whatever you're praying about, it's almost as if people or the Psalms themselves seem to suggest that what people do get is they get immediate or almost immediate resolve of their or change in their emotional position. And I want to get an example because there are lots of them. Um, yeah, I just literally opened the Bible and here's one. It's crazy. Lament Psalms are everywhere. They make up the largest category of Psalms, one of the largest categories of Psalms in the Bible, by the way. This is Psalm 61. Hear my cry, O God, listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you are my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy. Let me abide in your tent forever. Find refuge under the shadow or the shelter of your wings. For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. Prolong the life of the king. May his years endure to all generations. May he be enthroned forever before God. Appoint steadfast love and faithfulness to watch over him. So I will always sing praises to your name as I pay my vows day after day. This isn't probably one of the staple lament psalms, though this is a text that lots of people know. But it starts off with, a plea. I need you to hear me. And by not even the middle of it, soon after, this, psalmist is essentially praying what they want to see. Let this happen. Let that happen. And by the end of it, it is, when you do this, I will essentially right? I will always sing praises to your name as I pay my vows day after day. There are definitely stronger examples, but
you see glimpses of that throughout the book of Lamentations itself as well, right? Particularly like because Lamentations is that is the lowest of the low you can go, right? It in terms of woes and cries and all that kind of stuff, but right smack in the middle of the book, literally, is where the writer, one of the writers, has like they recollect, like their mind changes in that the individual starts saying, well, oh my goodness, the Lord has done this, and the Lord has broken our backs, and the Lord has done, and we ate gravel as we were on the road into captivity and all that kind of stuff. But I remembered, I forget what verse it is, and I don't even have, I think it's right around verse 22 in chapter 3. I remember the mercies of the Lord. They are not used up, pretty much, right? They are not finite. They are unlimited. The mercy of the Lord, the goodness of the Lord. Like all of a sudden, after the writers talk about all of this bad stuff, like all of this woe, and then somewhere he comes to himself or herself and says, but even though this is happening and I'm at my lowest and we're seeing really terrible times, it's the mercies of the Lord, still they're new every day, yet still I have some kind of hope. You see that glimmer of hope, and that's an emotional change right there. I'm not looking at the book, right, but I'm just recalling from memory. But yeah, you probably have it in front of you, right?
Yeah, let's read some of the stuff, because I love the point that you're making, and this is a much stronger example here. But I want to read it because then you can really see how distraught this writer is. Perceived to be Jeremiah, the traditional writer, Jeremiah. And you can totally get why it would be, right? Why it would be perceived to Jeremiah's book, prophetic book in itself, is fascinating. It's full of laments, full of complaints. And Jeremiah is really just it just seems like he's hating who he is. The whole book.
We sometimes do.
I get it.
Let's do sometimes. We hate
Yeah.
who we are. We talk about our lives. Oh my God, I've not accomplished anything. You might have 9 degrees on the wall, but you're like, I haven't done anything with my life. My life is a waste. Like we get into these pity woes and woe is me kind of thing. But here, emotional intelligence causes us to remember. Wait a minute now. Hold on. Go ahead, read, because I want to hear.
So this is what the writer says in verse 1. I am one who has seen affliction under the rod of God's wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Against me alone, he turns his hand, and again, all day long. He has made my flesh and my skin waste away and broken my bones. He has besieged and enveloped me with bitterness and tribulation. He has made me to sit in darkness like the dead of long ago. You guys, that he is God. God is doing this to the writer. He says in verse 13, he shot into my vitals, the arrows of his quiver. He feels personally attacked by God here. I have become the laughing stock of all my people, the object of their taunt songs all day long. He has filled me with bitterness. He has sated me with wormwood. And then in verse 19, the thought of my affliction and my homelessness is wormwood and gall. My soul continually thinks of it and is bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. So all of that is said pretty much, look, God, you've made me nothing. But the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for one to bear the yoke in youth, to sit alone in silence when the Lord has imposed it, to put one's mouth to the dust. There may yet be hope. To give one's cheek to the smiter and be filled with insults. All of this is good. What the Lord is doing to me sucks, but it's good, is essentially what this writer is saying.
But you have to have a mind about yourself, right? About this. Something has to happen here. And how did he get here? He says, but I recall to mind. I remember. There's a scripture in Proverbs that says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. A lot of what's happening to us, a lot of how we experience the world it begins and ends right here.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that I think people completely miss out on when they don't read the Old Testament. The entire text is about the importance of memory. All of it. Remember when I did this for you. Remember that. Remember when you were this. Remember, it's all about the art and the effect of memory and being able to hold on to those memories when things are not going the way that you want them to go. And another thing is, reading this also makes me think of Jesus. We have to mention Jesus, an example of Jesus. Have to. Jesus is close to the point in which he is to be taken prisoner. And what does he say in the garden? Take this cup from me, right? Why don't you just do that? If you can. I still want your will to be done, though. But, don't make me drink from this cup if I don't have to, essentially, right? Like, Jesus is also, in one way or another, finding himself with a lament, and specifically to God.
That's good.
The tormentor, according to Lamentations in my own life. It's a side piece, but I'm not joking, but I am. But Lamentations totally just helped me. So thank you for mentioning Lamentations. And by the way, while you were mentioning it, I was already there. It's like, yo, we are definitely in tune. But how would we end something like this? What should people do with information like this? And how might this relate to ways in which people can deepen their study and become better in regulating their emotions and becoming more emotionally aware with the tools that ABI has for them?
Okay, well, you can answer those questions. Um, but what I wanted to share, just about five different points that one of the articles that I read kind of highlighted, and it might be a litmus test for all of us, right? In terms of being able to identify whether or not we are passing as emotionally intelligent. So those five things are, in terms of signs of high emotional intelligence. The first thing the writer has here is a person who exhibits high emotional intelligence is a person who can handle criticism without denial, blame, excuses, or anxiety. That's part of self-awareness, right? The second thing is being open-minded, right? And that's especially when we're studying the text. So you'll come to Amana, and what you'll find is that even though we love Jesus, I love Jesus, I know I do, that we are willing to review the text in ways that we might not have reviewed it before. When we read, we want to read perhaps with a different perspective, with another lens, right? That's this idea of being open-minded. Recognizing that this faith that you have, this belief that you have, can't be shaken or can't be overturned. Really, if it's your faith, as you have said, it can't really be shaken by you just having by asking questions, interrogating the text. In fact, all throughout the text, you find stories, narratives where persons are always asking some kind of questions. Mm-hmm. So that's what you're going to find here. And you're going to need openness, open-mindedness when you come to Amana. So keep that as a plug right there. They're good listeners. That's another thing you're going to need when you come into our classes, because at Amana, our classrooms are welcoming to every people group, to every individual. And we try to create those spaces where everyone has an opportunity to be heard. So that means that when you come to our classes in our classroom, that you have to exercise really good listening habits. We're talking about what it means to be emotionally intelligent. And we don't sugarcoat the truth, right? The truth is the truth, whether you want me to tell it or not. So you'll hear some of those truths when you come to Amana, when you take a class with Latoya or some of the other instructors. You will hear some of those truths about where we stand, about the text, about how it was put together. They might seem like hard truths, but they're truths nonetheless. And the emotionally intelligent can shoulder the burden of hearing truths. And here is one that I love, number 5. It's this idea of being able to apologize when we're wrong. The emotionally intelligent finds it not robbery, as we love to say in the church. We don't find it robbery to apologize when necessary, right? So that's the kind of space that we create when you take a class here in Amana. If we make a mistake, we own up to it, we apologize, and we move forward. We want to create the kind of classroom where you want to keep coming back every single time. Hence the reason why we create these kinds of sessions, so that we can engage with you, engage with one another, and that we can all learn and grow together. So with that being said, I'll allow Latoya to do her magic trick.
Magic. So I totally agree with everything that Professor Onika has said. And I'm going to start off with these first two things that we offer here. We not only offer academic advisement, but spiritual advisement. And one of the things that has become really apparent is the work that we do here at Amana Bible Institute really requires quite a bit of willingness to hear people out and willingness to kind of shepherd people when they need it. And we often find that this happens with a lot of our students who are, breaking out of their rigid, the rigid and very closed boxes that they place the divine in. We have been gifted or graced in so many ways with helping people get out of those boxes. And I've actually been quite amazed at how well God has utilized us to keep people still intact. When you're touching people and their religious beliefs, their faith-based beliefs, you really risk breaking people. And for some reason, I think it's a divine purpose in so many ways. We've been really good at, being honest and helping people to continue the search, but still keeping them together. So at ABI, you'll always have us as communication partners, conversation partners, dialogue partners. We're your partners, not just your teachers, but your partners as you mature and evolve. Now, we have 4 classes that start the end of the month, around June 28th or so. Marketplace Ministry, Prophetic Artistry, Misreading Jesus and Paul, and last but not least, Prophets and Prophecy in the Bible. I didn't notice this until a few weeks ago, but all 4 of these classes in one way or another have at least, 1 week or a small bit of relevance to the prophetic. And there are probably very few things that help you to challenge your own emotional intelligence than the things related to the prophetic. And we're talking about it. It looks like we're talking about it at least in a one session. Marketplace Ministry, the prophet in the marketplace. Prophetic artistry is about utilizing your art form to to produce change in the world. It has everything to do with the prophetic. Of course, Prophets and Prophecy in the Bible, we're going in the text, we're learning about prophets, we're figuring out what they do, and we're thinking about how prophecy is at work and how should it be at work in the world today. And Misreading Jesus and Paul, you cannot read Jesus and Paul without thinking about the prophetic. You just cannot. They have lots to say about it. It's Jesus's whole person is that. So, and you're definitely going to find yourself challenged, but definitely challenged emotionally, challenging the way that you exist in the world, and challenged to think about how you could better exist. We also have a few other classes for the rest of the summer, like a course on how to write your book in 30 days. We have a free course, Bible Language Tools, online resources. It's completely free of charge, a 4-week course, completely online and in person, Nurturing the Prophetic Imagination. And last but not least, we're going to end the summer with a course on the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to be taking you through a bulk of the Hebrew Bible, and this is actually a 12-week course, because we're going to get the whole Testament in 12 weeks, which is hard, but it's good. And you would leave a Old Testament, or having the tools to work on becoming an Old Testament pro. Okay, so do register. You can register for these courses in a lot of ways. There are 3 particular ways. You can either join a Grow Plan, which is a monthly plan that allows you to take 1, 2, or 3 classes a month. We offer new classes every single month, so you won't miss a month. But if you do need to skip a month, you would just talk to us and we will make arrangements. Or you can take a certificate program where you pay a small fee every month for about 7 to 12 months. And it covers something around like 6 to 11 or so classes. And you get a certificate. Or you can pay per class, and just pay for the one class and decide if you want to re-enroll, or join our free course, join for free. But if you have any questions, we are here to answer them. Feel free to click this Let's Chat button on our website, and if we are immediately available, we will respond. And you can also feel free to call us or email us at amanabibleinstitute@gmail.com, and we will be here to answer any of your questions. Any other things that I might be missing, Professor Onika? Okay, well, then I hope you guys have a fabulous day, and thank you for watching. Bye.